Good afternoon and welcome to the virtual Crocker Art Museum. My name is Houghton Kinsman and I'm the Adult Education Coordinator here at the museum. Thank you all for joining us for another installment of the Indigenous Voices in Film project. I look forward to an engaging afternoon of discussion with you all. I would like to begin proceedings by reading a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the Crocker Art Museum is on the traditional land of the Nisenan people, and the current state of California is the homeland of many tribes. We are honored to be here today. So this afternoon, we present the third program in an 18-month project centered on exploring, highlighting, and platforming the work of Indigenous filmmakers and media artists. For today's program, we consider the links between Indigenous filmmakers living and working in our Northern California region and the wider state of California, and those working across the US. Joining us for today to chat more about their work are the filmmakers Jack Kohler, Adam Piron, and Jody Stillwater. Adam Piron is a member of the Kiowa tribe of Oklahoma and a Mohawk descendant. He currently acts as the director of the Sundance Institute's Indigenous Program, where he helps oversee the organization's investment in Indigenous filmmakers globally. He also serves as a short film programmer for the Sundance Film Festival. He is also co-founder of Cousin, a film collective dedicated to supporting Indigenous artists experimenting with and pushing the boundaries of the moving image. He was previously the film curator at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. He received his BA in film production from the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts. Joining Adam is Jack Kohler. Jack Kohler is Hooper, Yurok, and Karuk. He earned an engineering degree from Stanford, but his right brain wanted to create, so he became a filmmaker. He established On Native Ground, a Hooper tribal nonprofit film and media organization in 2006, out of a need for Indigenous voices to tell their own stories and history. He recently wrote Gift of Fear with his daughter Carly. It deals with the stories regarding missing and murdered Indigenous women. Something Inside Is Broken, Kohler's Native American rock opera, has won 24 awards, including a Native American Music Award for Best Rock Album, and is currently available on PBS. Jody Stillwater is a filmmaker and artist in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's renowned for his expertise in dynamic movement, semiotic language, time cycles, rhythm, and archetype synthesis. With over 30 films directed, his work often intricately explores the diverse Bay Area cultural ecology and the theme of growth following disruption. An Emmy-nominated filmmaker and co-founder of Yanasa Creative Group, Jody has showcased his work at prestigious venues including the MoMA in New York City, the Hammer Museum in LA, and the Honolulu Museum of Art. With a cultural background that is Chinese, Norwegian, Cherokee American, he identifies as mixed. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts today. Jack, Jody, and Adam.
All right.
Format for today's program is we'll chat for about an hour, and if you have any questions, let us know in the chat, and then I'll jump on at the end and ask our panelists the questions. So over to you, Jody.
For sure. Yeah, thank you everybody for coming today, and yeah, it's just a real honor to get into this dialogue and conversation. What I figured we would approach it today is that of a kind of an exploratory dialogue as well as introductory dialogue, so that the audience can get to know you both or all of us as filmmakers, as community participants, as artists, and as people. But also, what I'm really most excited about is just like what can come out of this dialogue. So I guess to begin with, I have a list of questions we can go with, but I absolutely feel free to diverge, and I'll do my best to I'll provide space to venture outward and also to bring it back inward too. Yeah. So Jack, Adam. So my first question is pretty broad, but also just I want to get to know more about your particular engagement with the medium of communication, with the medium of community, but also your personal language. So in the context of art, film, and community. Can you tell us a little bit about your practice? And I'll just say, let's start it with Jack.
Sure. Well, I began filmmaking out of a need to tell my tribe's story about water rights. At the time, we were fighting with the dams on the Klamath River. So it was a way to try to bring this story out to the public. And so when I started the film, I didn't have much experience with filmmaking. That was like in 1999 when we started filming. Besides being able to use a camera, I knew how to use a camera and shoot. So that whole process of creating that documentary, which took 8 years, and which PBS screened it on their, nationally for 2,000 times. So it became a film that a lot of people go to regarding the plight of the farmers, the 5 tribes on the river, commercial fishermen, just on the effect that dams have had on the Klamath River. And finally, in 2024, in fact, the end of July, the last of these 4 dams is going to come down. So it's been a pretty remarkable journey. But so my need to become a filmmaker stemmed on what my tribe needed. And because I had the most knowledge at the time, I was in the right place, I just jumped in and started doing it.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. I mean, that's so just pragmatic, building a need and then developing a language around the need. Have you found that your filmic language has evolved from expressing something for specific needs in the community, but evolved in terms of like artistically?
Well, artistically, I delved in a little more about storytelling, writing a good story, how to draw in the audience. So my writing skills really developed over the course of the last 20 years. But still, that my need to tell stories is usually based on a need that's happening in our community. I've made a lot of films on water rights issues. And then in 2010, I started to write about the missing and murdered Indigenous persons problem, which was really affecting my tribe because we have so many missing people within my tribal homelands. So I've pretty much my whole journey as a filmmaker has been focused on water rights or missing and murdered Indigenous persons. But the art of storytelling, I learned a lot from watching a lot of Sundance films, learning from, a lot of people I've worked with, Black Horse Low, a lot of people in the community, Stephen Most, one of my mentors, Jed Rife. So it's learning from these other professional filmmakers has really taught me how to become a good storyteller.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Adam, how about yourself in the context of art? Again, in the context of art, film, and community, could you tell us a little bit about your practice?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, like, as you'd mentioned, I have kind of a number of different hats that I wear. One of them is like, I'm the director of the Indigenous Program at Sundance, where, we've been around since the founding of Sundance, and, we support filmmakers through grants, labs, different workshops and things like that, and also the platform of the festival itself. So like that was kind of sort of where I got my start. I started interning there when I was in film school. And after that, I worked a number of other positions elsewhere. Like I was also the film curator at LACMA here in LA. And it was kind of like, just sort of like being in sort of the native film scene from kind of like an earlier part of sort of like, I guess, my journey, I guess you could say, into film. And I want to say probably back in 2018, myself and like 3 other of my friends who I also had known through Sundance, other Indigenous filmmakers, Sky Pinka, Adam Khalil, and Alexander Lazarovich. We were all at the Flaherty Film Seminar, and from there we founded this collective called Cousin, where we wanted to create a mechanism for folks that were working a bit more non-traditionally. It was work that's like not necessarily sort of within the, I guess you could say, the more of the realms or concerns of like representation within Hollywood and things like that, or the larger film industry. We were really more interested in just sort of giving Indigenous filmmakers space to experiment and to try new things, and to lean more into kind of their own voices and sort of like cultural logics, or even like interpreting their own indigeneity through film, however that might be. And so and like I think through that sort of like my own practice sort of like evolved. Like I was making films kind of like in film school, and then like a little bit afterwards, and then I sort of like fell off a little bit, but I kind of like sort of picked back up again around like in 2017, and was making stuff that I think was like a little bit more, I guess, what people would call experimental, or even though I'm trying to get away from that word and stuff too, because I think it's an easy bucket to kind of put a lot of work in that doesn't sort of fit the more kind of like European kind of Western European sort of idea of like a 3-act structure and things like that. And so, I was really trying to lean into certain specific kind of cultural stories, or not even so much cultural stories, but like different stories about Indigenous communities, or my own and stuff like that, but really sort of leaning into methods or ways of telling those stories that might, in my mind, sort of are like my own interpretation of like my own indigeneity, or just trying new things and stuff like that. So, really kind of trying to get beyond something that would look like a traditional film or things like that, or, something that would be more identifiable as like a 3-act structure or things like that. And, really just trying to lean into things that were like my own experience, or my own sort of, again, viewpoint on certain things, whether that was my own tribe or other communities, or even just like, other kind of aspects of existing and things like that. And so, so that's kind of where I'm at with sort of like all 3 of those different sort of hats that I wear and stuff. So, and then, even like with my work at Sundance too, I think part of that also is just, really encouraging filmmakers to lean into their own voices and stuff like that. Like, I think it's totally valid, and, we need people that are working in the film industry and things like that, but also, making space and also empowering folks that want to work outside of that system and want to create something on their own as well. So,
thank you for that. I completely agree and identify with that, because I also started out in experimental film. Well, the idea of experimental film, and it's a tough one to navigate, because oftentimes it feels like, or at least, maybe back, I'm speaking from a specific kind of perspective of like, coming up in the 90s, early aughts, and having like really kind of bad DV footage, and having that be such a specific aesthetic. And then like learning how to kind of develop a higher production value. And I found that as soon as like you could kind of speak a language of a higher production value in experimental film, it changed the way that people engaged with it, and it changed the language a little bit. And it's funny, because it's like this, it's doing that, you're kind of making this compromise to slide the language more towards a more approachable place, right? So it makes it a little bit sexy, but it still carries some of the evolving language. And what's kind of like what you were saying about like how experimental and taking time away from filmmaking and then coming back to it. I totally identify with that too, because it was like, it's like you come out of film school, or you come out of whatever practice, your intention to build films or your love for films, and then you learn how to make things that like, especially if you're kind of a not a mainstream filmmaker, you learn how to experience the world again through marinating in the things that you've learned about film.
Totally.
And learning about communication, and then how to then really transmit that. So I love about experimental film, somebody said something to me once. They were like, experimental film is like it's inherently anti-capitalist, because you can't sell anybody anything. That you're actually actively changing how you communicate. And oftentimes what will happen is, like, if you're in a room with a bunch of experimental audience or a screening, you're watching everybody kind of almost transmit as they watch the film. They're both receiving and transmitting, and there's this almost like kind of a psychic echo that moves through the space.
I think also, like, kind of off of that as well, like, I think it's there's an issue we're like through cousin and stuff, we're actually doing a screening in LA this evening. Like after this call, I gotta hop on and go do the tech check. But I was talking, like I got dinner last night with both of the filmmakers that we brought out, and we were kind of talking about that, about how and I think I don't know, like I think we're trying to I don't want to say create, it's not that, but I think we're just trying to like behave as if like certain, we don't have, I don't know, well, I don't know how I should put it. Like, I guess one of the filmmakers was saying something that I was really thinking about, where, we were talking about how sort of the drawbacks and the pros and cons of sort of like working under kind of the experimental film umbrella. Even if like you yourself don't necessarily consider your film experimental, or that it's like working within sort of a tradition of that kind of vein. But I think, there's something about it, though, I think, especially with those audiences, where I think people approach things with a bit more of like an open mind, or I think they're willing to kind of meet the work and the artist where they're at, versus I think with stuff that tends to be a little bit more mainstream, or maybe not mainstream, that's not the right way to put it, but just something that's a bit more like reaching for a broader audience, like intentionally, where so much of the work is spent like contextualizing like indigeneity, or like the artist within sort of the context of like America, which is like a reality for sure. But I think also like, I think people go into the more mainstream stuff to some extent, and that's also changing a lot now too. But I think there is still sort of a large kind of expectation that people are going into something with like an anthropological standpoint of, again, sort of like categorizing a certain idea of indigeneity, or having certain expectations of like what to see, or like what to not see, where I think, and again too, having to explain, like Indigenous artists having to explain what indigeneity is, or like what this is, where I think, again, with a lot of the folks that are working in more of kind of the, again, sort of the under the dome of experimental film, or like avant-garde, or whatever you want to call it and stuff, or the stuff that gets kind of pushed into there because it doesn't fit into the mainstream thing. I think that there's a lot of again, people are just a bit more like open to kind of just coming to it, where it's not, you're not really explaining indigeneity, you're just kind of like, or your own interpretation of it, you're just kind of doing it, and people are kind of like, they'll get it or they don't, or they'll be somewhere in the middle. But it's like the burden isn't on the filmmaker or the film to explain the whole history of like colonization and the US, which I think for me, I find like really liberating, because it's just kind of like, yeah, for me, like as a Native person, like what do I think of time, or like what if I just wanted, like, we were talking about it was like crazy, where we're like, if somebody just wanted to make a movie about like a Native dude that's walking his dog for like 2 hours and nothing happens to him, like he's just having a good day, people would be like, oh, that's probably experimental film, because you know what I mean, because they're expecting like some type of conflict or something like that, where it's just kind of like, yeah, no, I mean, it can just be that, so I don't know, it's a bit my own sort of rambling way of kind of
No, absolutely. I totally get that, and yeah, hear that. And to Jack, like in terms of like it's that your approach of pragmatism, of need-based communication, and like service-based communication in a way. It's like you're serving direct needs in the community. That changes the language in ways that are like almost like I'm stepping back a little bit to the term experimental for just a second, in that there's something inherently activist about it, because you're fighting for a way to break out of a mindset. And what's fascinating, I think, about your work, Jack, too, in as a motivator for navigating languages and breaking out of a mindset, is that space of like of it being like, I have to get this message out, and I need people to listen to it, and there's an effect I want it to have. And I think that's really both admirable and fascinating as an approach to just getting information across. Storytelling.
Yeah, that's true. In most of my films, I think of a way of reaching the audience that we normally don't reach, especially with the missing and murdered Indigenous women's issues and MMIP issues. It's like, how do we reach that audience that needs to hear it? I guess I'm sort of at the point where I'm tired of preaching to the choir, which is the Native American communities, because we know what's been affecting our communities. We know what's been the cause of the problem. How do we reach those non-Native communities, those non-Native viewers, so that we change their mindset about Native issues? I mean, I've talked to so many non-Natives about the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples conflict, and most of them say, well, isn't that like a Native problem? Isn't, you guys, maybe you drink or you go on a binge and you just disappear, right? Isn't that, so it's trying to explain the whole crisis, which started over 500 years ago, with Pocahontas being the first, documented missing and murdered Indigenous woman. So I've had to, and that's when we started, when we were shooting Gift of Fear. Well, originally it started out as a documentary. We're interviewing all these Native relatives who had missing relatives, whether they were sisters, cousins, brothers, aunts, uncles. And I said, it's going to be great to put it in a documentary form, but really the only people that are going to really watch it and feel what we're feeling right now is the Native audience. How do we reach the non-Native audience? And so we decided, okay, we're going to take all these stories and we're going to write a narrative feature film, make it entertaining, but still gripping enough where we pull in the non-Native audience. And that's what we did. And that's the same reason why we made Something Inside Is Broken, which is a rock opera. We were aimed, our music was, rock music. It was in your face, but it was about the history and manifest destiny told from the pioneers' point of view and the Native Americans' point of view, but sort of like a in-your-face type of a, sort of like how Tommy was. It was like all the music was right there in your face, and you're rocking along with it, and then you're starting to take in the words and realizing, oh, they're talking about massacres and Redskins. So I guess my approach has always been, I try to think of it in a backwards way, is how do we reach that audience that we want to reach, that needs to hear the message, not necessarily the audience that already knows our message, knows our true history, but how do we reach that PBS audience, the white audience, the 50-year-olds who grew up not understanding the true historical meaning of genocide in Native Americans,
Yeah. And I think also kind of adding to what Jack was saying too, I think also from what I was saying too, it's like, I'm not saying my way of the way that I make stories is like the right or correct way or anything like that. I think I think Jack's doing some really important work. And I think there are a lot of people that, are reaching, a non-Native audience, because it's like, the thing is the thing with the whole history of not even before moving image, even just the idea of the image of Native people, which is I don't know, hopefully this makes sense. I'll have to try to articulate this a little bit, but it's a lot of this is just it's a construct by non-Indigenous people. And I think people have used that image since Columbus to justify certain things. And I think that some of the stuff that Jack's doing and a lot of filmmakers like him is a lot of the things with the use of these images have always been, they've affected very real policy, and they've been used for very real policies with things. And I think, the work with Jack and a lot of other folks that are doing that type of work of trying to reach a non-Native audience or a broader audience is there's also that aim for hitting things that can actually change the way that, the realities that we have to move through as well too. So yeah. So
totally.
And I think that's what, what Res Dogs has done. I mean, actually going back, Adam, to an interview that we did with Chris Hare back in 2013 at the Sundance Film Festival. Mm-hmm. And what struck me about this interview is he said, anytime you put a Native American on the screen, the film becomes political. Mm-hmm. I think now, 10 years later, we finally come to the point where you see a Native American on screen and right away you're not thinking something political or, Res Dogs is a story, about kids trying to find their place in the world.
Yeah.
It's not about, a Native American community. It's more about these kids trying to find out who they really are, and that's what I gathered from it, and that's what struck me as being, you know, really cool about Res Dogs. It's like you could have put any set of group of kids into those roles, and it would have been the same script, you know.
Yeah, it's like something I always think of, which is like, this is like not even a native film at all, but like one thing I always think of is like the Michael Mann film Heat, where like Wes Studi's there and he's just like a cop, but it's just like there's no contextualizing of him. It's just like, and I think that came out in like 95. So I think, you know, I'm sure people were expecting the whole time for this character to explain who he was, like why there was a native dude that was just a cop with a shotgun. And it's like, you know, it's kind of rad to see that movie because it's just like, he's just a dude, you know, which is like great. And I think kind of to what Jack was saying, it's like, I think even for like myself as like a native viewer watching that, like the first time I watched that was my expectation. I was like, oh, when is he going to get around to like explaining who he is and stuff? And then kind of also myself asking that question of like, well, why am I asking that? You know, like why do I need that? But also just like having it also be like, yeah, it's a cool thing. Like, you know, where, again, kind of going with what Jack was saying with Res Dogs and stuff like that, where it's just like, I think we're getting to the point now where, you're seeing, I wouldn't say it's more, I think in terms of film and stuff, both mainstream and non-mainstream, of just sort of like, it's a much more like normal and not, it's not as rare just to see Native people just being people and like, and, you know, having that not, I mean, I guess you could say it is like, it's always the question of like, you know, what film isn't political or things like that. But I think there is something that like, it's nice just to see like a Native character just show up and it's not, you know, delving into anything else. So, you know what I mean? Like they're just there, where it's like the same way where, you know, if Jack and I met up or something like that, we'd go, I don't know, go watch a football game at a bar or something like that. But it's like, we're not explaining the whole time of like our whole family histories and things like that. We're just dudes just enjoying a beer or something, you know? So like, which is nice. It's like, I hope things get more towards that as well. So, yeah.
Totally. One of my favorite bumper stickers I've ever seen is I saw it in Honolulu in Hawaii, called they said decolonize the colonizer within.
Yeah.
And it was like, it's just like, I think about that all the time because I'm like, okay, all right, how am I, you know, what structures have I wrapped myself around as developmentally, like whether it's, you know, racism, classism, sexism, all the things. And it's tough work. And especially, and like we have that responsibility as filmmakers. Like if you're going to put something out there, you have to approach those things and maybe even put the process of that on screen while you're doing it, because it's that activity that gives the film life and it gives it presence in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's like also too, I think it's like there's something to that where, you know, like Indigenous people are not like, we're not a monolith at all. Like even amongst like, I mean, just, you know, everyone talks about even like all the amount of tribes, but I mean, even within the tribes, it's like, you're not going to find two of the same people, you know? And I think it's, I think that's the thing that I, you know, the thing that I always try to advocate for or champion or whatever is like really having that in film and whatever that means within moving image. Cause it's like, I think even if we're really thinking of like, that's always my thing. I'm like, if we really believe and we're really talking about like sovereignty and stuff like that, like, I don't know why we would ever tell, you know, barring certain like cultural things and stuff like that. Like, I don't know why we would ever tell like any Native person what they should or shouldn't be doing in terms of their own story or in terms of their own voice. Where I think that that's, you know, again, too, barring like there are certain cultural responsibilities or things, you know, that you can be responsible or not responsible with. But I think, you know, I'm meaning it more in sort of like a general kind of way where it's like, you know, somebody may want to like tell a story of like MMIP in like a way that's, you know, I'm just throwing this out. I'm not saying I would do this, but I'm just saying like somebody might approach it in a way of like, well, what does this look like as like a family drama? Somebody else might be like, well, what does this look like as a musical? Or like, you know, what does this look like as an experimental film? And it's like, there's no single right way of doing something. And I think that as if we embrace that with, you know, other Indigenous people, in terms of that, whether it is something that is like this hyper experimental kind of film, or something that is like, you know, somebody going for like trying to be the next Ryan Coogler or something like that. Like, but there's no right or wrong way to do it, you know. And I think it's just like, I think as long as we can kind of make the stage as big as we can for everyone, I don't see how anybody loses in that. So yeah,
and you have to fill out all the parts of the spectrum, otherwise it's just held up by this crutch of one channel, one what do they say, lane.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
you know, don't stick to the lane, let's fill all the lanes.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. So
sorry, Jack, you look like you were gonna say something.
I was laughing.
Okay. Oh, good. Yes. Cool. So this is like kind of this is slightly different, super different, I guess. Like, but my next question is, what kind of films have you been drawn to lately, as you know, as an audience yourself, as in the context of everything that we've just been saying too?
Oh, man. I'll let Jack go first.
Oh, you'll let me go first.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the types of films I'm always drawn to are science fiction. I'm like a big science fiction watcher. I love science fiction movies. We need to make more Native American science fiction movies, but I've always been drawn to those stories where you know, there's someone is trying to overcome some sort of personal quest. Coming of age stories have always drawn me in. You know, good versus bad. I guess that's sort of been the theme in all my films. You know, going just back again on stuff that I've focused on, I've always either focused on films about water rights, tribal water rights, or missing relatives. I mean, I've got a couple of missing relatives in my family, so I know that pain, and I've seen it in so many people that we've interviewed. So that's sort of my quest. I know that's what I'm going to be making films about probably the rest of my life, is, you know, the struggle to try to teach people about human trafficking, and then the correct history of what's happened to Native America.
So you're searching out other films that have that kind of similar subject matter that you can build with.
Yeah, and you know, I think a lot of science fiction movies are similar in that there's usually, you know, a hero's quest, and they're searching to right some wrong, and maybe that's why I'm drawn to science fiction, because it takes me less out of the real world issues.
Well, similarly to like coming of age films too, I would almost say like coming of age is this is maybe a stretch, but like coming of age is almost like science fiction, because you're going from this one kind of chaotic, like youthful wonder thing, and then you're funneling it out into the world, and you're like reaching out to these hard things that seem to distract you at the time, that you've only seen in movies or in other spaces, and you're kind of pulling yourself towards it, but you're like being pulled apart and into different stages. So it's in that way, it's almost fantastic. So yeah. Adam, how about yourself? What kind of films have you been drawn to lately?
Oh man. Well, I mean, I actually just saw earlier today, I went with my daughter to go see Inside Out 2, which I was actually like, I didn't think it was as strong as the first one, but it's like, I will say it's like, I mean, you know, my kid's 6, and so it's like, you know, spending obviously a lot of time watching the same stuff she does. But yeah, I mean, like, and I don't mean this in like a weird way or whatever, but it's like, I'm always like very kind of not surprised, no, that's not the right word, but I'm always actually like very impressed by films that are like very well made with like a child audience in mind, because it's like, I think it's a lot harder than I think people think, because I think as children, as audiences, I actually think like outside of a financial means, I think like they generally tend to get written off a lot more. It's like, oh yeah, it's like kid stuff or whatever. But it's like, you know, I mean, I think like Inside Out 2, it's like the way that it manages to like get on a kid's level and explain things that I think even adults have a hard time explaining, like in a way that makes sense to them, and do it in a way that's like entertaining. I was like, but also make it like very emotional at the same time. Like I was very impressed by just like how like the ability of people to be able to do that, and especially like sort of a larger machine of kind of like Pixar and Disney, which has its own problems obviously, but I mean like when something like that kind of comes out, and there's even stuff in the film that like it's subtle, but like if you watch it, if you look close enough, you'll see it of it like actually critiquing kind of the state of Disney and like a larger kind of like corporate kind of like mindset in a way that is like I found somewhat a little bit more subversive than I kind of expected. But yeah, I mean, I'm just always impressed when people can make like films for kids that aren't like stupid, if that makes sense. Like they're not treating kids like idiots and stuff. And so I think that, and then I think also I don't know, for some reason I've been watching like a lot of like Tubi this like I've been watching like I've gone on a deep dive on like spaghetti westerns, which I actually find like really interesting, because it's like I think there's this like series that's getting announced soon that I'm like working on, but I've been like spending a lot of times like watching westerns and things like that, and so, but I'm like really impressed by a lot of spaghetti westerns, because I think like there's a way that I think Europeans, I think because they are removed and they're sort of seeing America from the outside in versus like the other way out, that I think it's markedly different from like I think kind of the tradition of American westerns, where a lot of American westerns are much of it is about like romanticizing kind of the West and westward expansion, where I think Europeans are specifically like, you know, I guess you could say the Italians and to some extent like the Spanish, ironically, like we're making these films that like had a very different approach, and were like in a lot of ways I find, I mean, I grew up in the Southwest, but I think to me when I watch those films they feel closer to kind of that landscape, even though they were shot in Spain and stuff. But there's something I think to me about them that are a little bit more honest about how kind of like disgusting all that is, and like, but also in a way that like there's a real like grit and kind of like I guess you could say sort of like a primitivism in the way that they're looking at the West, and and the way I'm using that word is the sense of it's sort of like their connection to how they see like a rougher part of nature, and kind of it playing into sort of these like very sort of like base ideas of humanity and stuff, but like more so on like the settler colonial side, which I think is really interesting.
Right.
Yeah. But I don't know, like I was joking around with a friend. We were kind of talking about like why Europeans are so much more critical of, you know, histories of genocide and stuff like that in the US. And we were kind of joking around saying that it's like, yeah, I think it's because it's like, you know, one of the many genocides they're not technically responsible for. So like they're very quick to jump on it, you know, and point the finger and stuff. But it is really interesting to kind of see all those dynamics play out in these films that are about, you know, the West and kind of the history of westward expansion, but they're also made in Europe. And so it's like there's a lot of layers to it, I think, of just how those films, to me at least, are to me it feels a lot more closer to like maybe a truer reading of that history versus kind of like when Americans make it, and then it's like, you know, Kevin Costner makes a movie about like how great westward expansion was or whatever. So
yeah. I think there's also kind of that inherent distrust of Americans too that like,
totally
exercised there.
Yeah.
So they're super willing to have like the sweaty piggy dude with a poncho who's like white dude who's like just really super dismissive of everyone, very clearly in it for himself, and then kind of gets his comeuppance.
Yeah. And they're super like misanthropic too, where they're just like, it's not like there's no like honor that anybody walks away from. It's a bunch of people that are always trying to rip the other person off, which I'm like, yeah, that's kind of like what the West was. You know?
Exactly.
So yeah, they're interesting. Yeah. So
The mystique is probably only really about like 10% of the drive that happens.
Totally.
The mystique and wonder of the wild frontier.
Yeah,
as opposed to the like, I'm gonna get mine.
Yeah, it's just like anybody in those films, it's like they just depict anybody that's in the West as like either one desperate enough to kind of like try to uproot their lives and live through that, or like total psychopaths and just like riffraff. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of probably what it was like. So yeah, totally. So
yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. let's see. Okay, so my next question is, do you believe in a universal language of film? Adam, one of your projects that I've always wanted to see was your live talk about the indigenous lens on Hitchcock's Vertigo.
Oh yeah.
And I'm still campaigning on that. I'm gonna make that happen one of these days.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just putting it out there now. And as a filmmaker and someone that I consider to have a critical and engaged eye, how is it? This is like three different questions. But do you believe in a universal language of film across cultures? And what do you feel like is internal to those that you find that you connect to?
I don't think there's a universal language, which I think is great. I would hate if there was a universal language, to be honest. It's like I think it's just more like I think that there's like, obviously, I think with film there's like a certain connection that can be made, but I think I mean, like, I love films from Iran or films from like Japan and stuff, and like I myself love getting like on the level of those films, or as much as I can, like the way that they kind of demand it. And I think that even like with experimental film and stuff too, just like how you're looking at a lot of different ways of how just like different individuals like look or are trying to communicate in a way that seems natural to them, or like something that is a bit more out there. But I think like I don't know. I mean, I think if anything, if there is any sort of like universal language that I'm into, is kind of like that. I don't think anything can really beat showing a film in a theater with like an audience and sort of people having that communal kind of experience, like where it's like, it is this weird thing that I don't know, like, I don't know if I'd say it's necessarily something spiritual, but I think there's like maybe something a bit more like human to it, of just people kind of connecting and looking at the same thing, of just like this image that's larger than them and kind of getting enveloped in whatever is being communicated. And I think, I don't know, there's something to that. But I also think too, I mean, I think like, I don't know, like, I mean, I think with my own work in terms of like making films, like there is kind of a weird, again, I don't know if it's like a spiritual kind of thing, but like there is kind of like a weird thing that happens with, I think if you're doing the film right, like the film is kind of telling you how it wants to be made, or how it kind of like, at a certain point, like the film's kind of talking to you, or it's sort of like making itself, and like you're kind of the instrument to a certain extent. And I think that that's something where it's like, as that kind of happens, and when that happens, I'm like, okay, cool, like I'm doing something right here. And I think I don't know if that's because I'm engaging with my own culture or indigeneity, and like that's the thing that happens. But I think I mean, I'm sure it happens with other people, but I think I don't know, there's something like rewarding about that, where I'm like, there's something I don't know how to explain about that experience of just like, you're making something and you kind of like, it'll tell you to kind of like step away for a month or something like that. And then you come back to it, and you come to it with a new lens, where you're like, oh yeah, I was right about this part, or like, this part doesn't work. And then, you're just kind of in the zone. And then even like, when you send your film off and stuff like that, I think like, it's just sort of like, I don't know, like, it's not like having a kid, but it's like, I think a similar experience where you're just kind of like, okay, cool. Like you're off to school, and like, hope it works out. And then it kind of like, it takes its own path and stuff, and in ways that you don't really see, or sometimes it like goes beyond your expectations, which is really cool. And I don't know. It's like a weird thing. I don't really know how to totally explain it, but that's, I think maybe if there is a universal language, maybe it's on both sides of that, with the audience and the creation of it. So
I see what you mean. Like and the it's like it's you can like when your body talks back to you and it says like, no, that's the rhythm is wrong, or there's too much like what is the discord in the way these two feelings are coming together. It's all it's kind of like, hearing you say that makes me think of the of just like, millions of years of evolution, and the movement of a nervous system kind of engaging with reality, and it kind of becoming aerodynamic with its world. If you look at the whole world as like kind of its own nervous system, and you're just kind of shooting like all these kind of neurological pathways out of you and back into you, and working on the feedback of that, the rewards and the language of that. So Jack, do you want to? Do you believe in a universal language of film?
I don't know. I've been trying to think of that since you sent me those questions. I mean, film has become sort of I mean, there's two thoughts of film. When I was in Paris at a film festival, I spoke to a lot of expatriates there from America who went to France to make films because in France they made films for art's sake. Mm-hmm. And in America, a lot of filmmakers make films for money's sake, for the outcome. It all depends on what is this film going to bring me as far as a financial gain. Whereas in a lot of European countries, where they get funds from the government to make their films, they make it for art's sake. So it doesn't follow the standard model of act 1 through 3. And then also culture wise, there's films I saw a film made from, it was either Thailand or Burma. And I was talking to the filmmaker and he said, all films, and if it's a good film, it has to end in a tragedy. Whereas in, films in America or the United States, they always have to end with some positive outcome. And so there was an American filmmaker working on this film with a Burmese filmmaker, and they were arguing about the ending. They couldn't get the ending because they said, well, if you show that film in my homeland, people aren't going to get it because it doesn't end in tragedy. Mm-hmm. So I think it depends on the culture you're dealing with and what type of film you're trying to tell. I think pretty much, if it's a good film, you're going to be able to win over your audience if it's a good piece of storytelling, whether it has the standard Hollywood method or whether it's, a cultural method. Not all Native stories have an ending. They just sort of continue on, so yeah.
I think that's interesting because sometimes I think films as kind of the dreams of a culture, right? And when you go to sleep, right, and you've had this experience of the day, and you have your experience of what what to be true in the world and how you experience reality, right? And then when something changes in the day that upsets the apple cart of that structure, and then you go to sleep, and the dreams oftentimes will break it all apart, and then you'll kind of start to refuse them back together. And then kind of a satisfying dream oftentimes is that thing where it's like, okay, the world is resettled again. I can see it in this new way. And but sometimes you wake up out of it, and then you'll wake up out of the middle of it and it won't be settled. And it can be kind of both it makes you very aware of the dream. It makes you very aware that maybe there's a opening or a fissure or a unresolved engagement with your constructed reality, and such that you kind of have to spend that time reorienting yourself. And so then you're actively kind of changing. You're looking at reality as if it needs to be changed or it needs to be settled. So it's an interesting to hear you say that about for France in relationship to United States films and culturally. It says a lot, I think, about what it means to engage with reality too. It's are you open to the shift of it? Are you open to the evolving and changing element? Or and oftentimes what I think about with the United States is that there is so much unresolved here that I think makes people uncomfortable if you don't provide them with a resolution.
Yeah.
And it's because if you don't have that resolution, then everything is fucking nuts because it is.
Well, yeah, it's I think it's kind of with what Jack was saying, where it's and what you're saying, where it's I think that's part of the US's problem, is that I think there's too much of a belief in a happy ending as it currently is, where it's again, we're talking about Westerns or something like that, where they're just kind of oh yeah, well, that happened, but the bright side of the story is we're all here now. And it's like, what? Like, there's still a problem here. Like, you know, and I think it's yeah, I don't know. I think that there's something about that too, where again, it's like, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to make films necessarily. Like, but I think that there's a, I don't know. Yeah. I think it's like, if we're trying to tap into a reality, I think we can also be a little bit more honest and a little bit more bold in terms of like some of the questions and the filmmaking that like reflects some of those questions and stuff too, I think. So, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the next question here. So are there connections, or do you perceive connections between a new generation of Indigenous filmmakers, such as, you know, imagining Indigenous cinema, new voices, and new vision projects that are straddling the film and the art world, and like such, like, you know, with you guys, with Black Horse Low, Sky Hapinka, Rob Patel, Tiare Ribo, Zach Khalil, all seem to work across the artistic boundaries. Mm-hmm. And like Adam, you were assistant film curator at LACMA, and Jack, you've shown films at the Crocker. I've also shown films at the Crocker and at a few different art institutions. Do you find that straddling that those two worlds, that I guess that's a new space, or I guess what the question would be, are there connections between film and the museum space?
Well, I, you know, the museum space has always been controversial sometimes for Native Americans, because we started out being put in with the Natural History Museum, and so and then museums have always, you know, museums and institutions have collected bones and artifacts of our people and not return them. So I mean, I think there's still a long ways to go in that idea, but and I haven't necessarily seen enough films at museums telling the you know, through the Native Americans' eyes, the true histories. So I think there's still a long ways to go in that response. But as far as the entertainment industry, I think we've made a big stride towards telling the stories that we want to tell as Native Americans, because we have a lot more Native directors and writers out there, you know, stirring up the business and showing that, you know, we can be we can create a profit for Hollywood through our writing and the way we want to tell stories, as opposed to how Hollywood used to tell our stories. So I think that's about all I can offer there.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, kind of echoing what Jack was saying. I think, you know, there's like, I mean, museums have been and continue to be sort of a very sort of hot button issue, I think, within Native communities. And there's like a huge history of distrust based off of, you know, a lot of the legacies of and ongoing work of, I think, certain museums and things like that. And I think, but I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting concept too, because I think it's, I don't know, like the way I think about it too is also, I think in regard to film, it is like a newer, I mean, it's like, you know, barely 130, 140 years old as a medium now. And I think it's, I think people are still trying to figure out what this thing is, you know, I think to a certain extent, I think, and I think even within Indigenous communities and stuff too, I mean, I think, you know, even though there's the work that we're doing, I don't think like Native filmmakers are seen as yet on like sort of the same cultural, like intercultural kind of plane as like, you know, folks that might make more traditional art and things like that. It's still kind of seen as something different. And it's a newer thing. Like, I mean, I think, well, not necessarily Native people making films. I mean, like been Native people making films since the beginning of film and stuff. And I think that, I just think, yeah, I think it's still very much kind of like the like I think we're still very much in kind of the chrysalis of sort of what this thing might be. And I think I don't know, it's a funny kind of line to kind of walk, because I mean, again too, it's like you can, with film, because it is such a kind of communal type of art and stuff like that, like it, you know, it means something to have your film play at MoMA, you know what I mean? It means something to have your film play at the Smithsonian, or, you know, or Cannes or whatever and stuff. And I think that I don't know, it's an interesting conceit, because it's like, as much as you can kind of like want to push against some of those systems, you do still have to engage with them to some extent. It's, you know, we're not totally on an island, but I think I don't know, yeah, I mean, I think Native people that are kind of making their own spaces with that, even like there are tribal museums, there are other tribal efforts to try to do things differently or outside of, you know, some of these systems. And I think that it's just as important to support and try to foster those places as it is to try to get people into some of these other venues. Because it's like, you know, I think it's sure, it's great that I think some people you know, might make a film that gets nominated for an Oscar and stuff like that, but I also think it's like, it's as important that somebody's making something for, you know, people in their tribe, even if it's for like 5 people in the that are an audience, or, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's even more so probably too, because it's like, I think if things have impact in our community, then that really is a true kind of Indigenous cinema. You know, it is truly something that is like kind of hitting something out. You know, it's like both for us and by us, I guess, if that makes sense. So yeah,
and it's also to piggyback on that, the audience, the kind of more global audience, is coming to you more. Like, it's coming, if you make the film for your community, there's more opportunity now for the global audience to not just, like, we don't always have to be reaching out to them.
No, yeah,
there's more reaching out to us as well.
And I think it's like, it's as much as like, sure, I think it's great that some people are getting a seat at, you know, the table, so to speak. But I also think it's like, why not have our own table? You know, like people like, and also like people can come to it too. Like, and I think that's always a thing. I always sort of stand by that, whether it's from like a curation or just like history of art and culture and stuff. It's like the biggest thing that like people want to be a part of is the thing that they're not. And so I think it's like, definitely. You know, in the same way too, it's like, I mean, it's the same reason why like non-Indigenous people show up at powwows or at indie markets and things like that. And it's like, they want to be a part of that. And it's like, they're maybe not necessarily the audience for that, but it's like, I think it's, people want to experience other things outside of themselves. So,
and just to really also piggyback on that one too, for both you guys, so what do you hope to see from art museums in terms of support moving into the future? And this is kind of, we're speaking kind of directly to the Crocker here, I believe.
I don't know, maybe like commission some stuff, like that'd be cool. Like, you know, it's always cool to see like Native folks get like money to make something cool, and then I think it reflects on the museum too. So that's really exciting.
Go out and make some new true history about their communities. That would be great to be funded for. Have a collection. It'd be great to have a collection of Native films at museums, especially those directors that consider themselves more of an art type of a filmmaker. It'd just be great to have those, you know, on hand so people can watch them. Because I go to a lot of film festivals and I see a lot of these cool short films, but then you never see them again. You know, it'd be great to see some of these at museums, at a collection.
Yeah, agreed. So I guess I kind of have a final thing here. Really, and thank you so much, guys, for the fascinating conversation, and it's just been really fun and stimulating and like educational. Like, I mean, by educational, I mean, like, you know, I feel grown. So how can we follow your work? Like, what have you been working on that you want to put out there here in the space? And how can we, what are your favorite ways to have people follow your work? Here, Jack, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so let's see. On July 9th, we have a film, Gift of Fear, which is going to start streaming on 9 platforms. Amazon's one of them. It's called Gift of Fear. It's about missing and murdered Indigenous women. And then I also have an Apple podcast, Floodlights, with Laura Frater, which On Native Ground has produced. There's 48 episodes starting on July 9th also, which is pretty cool. So both of them launch on July 9th. Something Inside is Broken is available on pbs.org. I guess there was one question that you sent me that I'm just going to really touch on that we
Go
didn't
for it.
touch on.
I skipped a couple questions because we're running out of time, but if you feel, go for it.
Yeah, it's just for those filmmakers out there that, or those young filmmakers. I have never waited for everything to be perfect to start my film, especially funding. If you wait for everything to be perfect, then it'll never get made. And I truly believe in the term in that movie, if you build it, they will come. Because every one of my films, I've never had enough funding to start making it until we started shooting it, and then we were able to start gathering funds. So if you have a passion film that needs to be made or is going to help someone somewhere, you just got to go out and do it. You can't wait for perfection, because perfection never happens. Even your final edit is never going to be perfection. You're always going to say, I should have done this or that. But you just got to go out and do it.
Awesome. And Jack, do you have a social media?
Oh yeah, our social media. So you can go to onnativeground.org and you can find all of our links and productions. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I wanted to plug, which is with my work at Sundance, at least, is last year we received an endowment from the Federated Indians of the Grayton Rancheria. So we actually have a specific effort through that endowment for folks that are from California-based tribes. You can both be sort of already working in film and doing your own stuff, or you can also just be sort of starting on your journey. But if you go to sundance.org and you look at the sort of top tab where it says artist programs, go to Indigenous Program, and there'll be some information on both we have a fellowship. This year we'll be selecting 2 people applying. It's $20,000 that goes towards your film the way that you see fit, and we work and give you some creative support through that. And then there's also another thing that we have, which is we have an online platform and community called Collab. So there's a list of master classes and other it's an online community as well too. So it's everything from screenplay writing to if you want to know how to edit documentaries and things like that. So and both of them are free to apply. And the same thing with the Collab thing. It's the membership for it is usually pretty expensive, but if you apply and you are from a California-based tribe, it's totally for free. So yeah, I would encourage everybody in the next week or 2 if you want to apply, because we're sort of doing the next round of selections with everything with that. So again, that is specific to folks from California-based tribes. I'm sorry for all the other in California like myself, but this is specifically for folks from California. Part of it has to do with sort of the larger history of film and how so much has happened within California Indian land, but there's been very little reciprocity in terms of any of that. So this is one effort that we're hoping in the long run makes a difference with folks. And so yeah, with that, but then even with my own work, I do have some films that are touring on kind of the festival circuit. They're a bit more international right now. Some of them I can't announce yet, but then I've also been working on some new work that will also be playing at some festivals coming out that'll be soon to be announced. So
what's it called?
It's actually called Black Glass. It's I'd done sort of I'd spent a lot of time just kind of researching and reading about Edward Muybridge, and he was kind of part of the effort in the Modoc War against the Modoc tribe, but also how it was a very sort of fundamental kind of story of kind of pre-cinematic technology to some extent of stuff he was doing, but also how it was at the very time sort of very representational of a larger kind of thing that happens, I think, with Native people being misrepresented, and again, this being the case of the guy who's considered the father of the moving image, and sort of directly engaging not just in that, but also in like direct warfare and efforts like against Native people. So yeah, I was in Oregon. I had to go up to Oregon. I was there for a residency last year, but on the way up there, I went and filmed at the Lava Beds National Monument, which was like where that conflict happened. And so it's sort of a larger kind of history. It's part of a larger project that I've kind of been working on. So, but yeah, that one, it just recently got selected for a festival I can't announce yet and stuff, but yeah, keep an eye out. But I can be, probably the easiest place to follow me is on Twitter, or X as it's called now, I guess. But
I'm not gonna say X.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say it.
Yeah, you can find me on there, just like Adam_Piron, but or just look me up. I'll pop up, I'm sure. So yeah.
Yeah, I highly recommend Adam's Twitter account. It's really funny and insightful.
Thanks.
All right, thank you for that. I have a couple films that are on the festival circuit and are about to just start the festival circuit. A film that I directed called The Wind Telephone is about to play at Black Star Festival in Philadelphia in August, if anybody finds themselves in Philly. And a second film playing in that festival that I co-directed with Thierry Ribaud called Saturn Rising is also playing there, and it is playing, actually, I think it just played today during this talk at the Frameline Film Festival in San Francisco.
Nice.
And I got another film that I'm working that me and I collaborated with Richard Hamasaki and Sebastian Galasso on a film called Manifesto for Concrete Poetry, which is it's a piece that it honors the life and poetry of Wayne Kamali Westlake, who is a poet, native Hawaiian poet in Honolulu, and Richard has been entrusted with Wayne's legacy. So we're working on different exhibitions and of work, and it's related to Wayne's work, but also this film called Manifesto, which, coincidentally, we also submitted to Sundance, and it'll also be premiering at another film festival in October, which can't be announced yet. But yeah, and you can follow me on at Jody Stillwater on Instagram and Twitter, and www.jodystillwater.com. Cool. And yeah, and I want to say thank you to the Crocker, and thank you to Houghton Kinsman for hosting us and reaching out and organizing all this. And yeah, it's been really, you guys, truly a pleasure and an honor and a delight. So, I really glad you guys were able to come out today, and thank you for your contributions. And I thank you for your contributions to culture, and with your art and your creativity, and with your critical engagement.
Thanks, Jody.
Thanks, Jody.
For sure.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, it's good
I
seeing
want to
you.
join and say thanks, everybody. I appreciate you all being here. It was a fascinating discussion. For those of you watching at home, if you want to follow Jack, Jody, and Adam, just look out for my post-program email. I include the links that they mentioned in the talk. And I hope you'll come and join us in person at the Crocker in August for the next Indigenous Voices in Film program. So thank you, Jody, Adam, and Jack, for being here. Thank you, everybody, for watching at home. I hope you enjoyed the program. Have a good rest of the weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
See you guys.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.